The check arrived at his table like it always did, quiet, expected, and heavy in a way no paper should ever feel. Mark stared at the number printed at the bottom, his chest tightening just a little more than usual. He had been counting every dollar lately, stretching each one like it could somehow last longer if he tried hard enough. But what happened next was something he would never forget. Because before he could even reach for his wallet, the waitress came back with a confused smile and said, "Sir, your bill has already been taken care of." And taped to the receipt was a note that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to support the channel. If you enjoy stories that restore your faith in humanity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Welcome to Kindness Story Hub, where every story reminds us that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Mark Reynolds wasn't the kind of man who asked for help. He had always been the one people leaned on, the steady one, the dependable one. For years, he worked as a construction supervisor in a small Ohio town, earning just enough to keep things running for his family. But life had a way of shifting without warning. 6 months ago, the company he worked for shut down. Just like that, his job was gone. At first, Mark stayed hopeful. He told himself it was temporary, that something better would come along. But weeks turned into months. His savings started to disappear. Bills piled up. And the quiet pressure of providing for his wife and young daughter began to weigh on him like never before. That evening, Mark sat alone in a small roadside diner. It wasn't a fancy place, just a warm, slightly worn spot where the smell of coffee and grilled food lingered in the air. He had come there not just for the meal, but for a moment of peace. At home, things felt heavier. He had ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a simple burger and fries. As he ate, he found himself staring out the window, lost in thought. His mind kept circling back to the same questions. How much longer could they manage? What if he couldn't find work soon? What kind of future was he giving his daughter? He sighed, rubbing his forehead, trying to push the thoughts away. The waitress, a kind woman named Linda, had noticed his quiet mood. She didn't say much, but she kept his coffee topped off, offering small, reassuring smiles. Sometimes, even that meant more than words. When Mark finished his meal, he sat there for a moment, mentally preparing himself to look at the bill. It felt strange how something so small could carry so much weight. Finally, he reached for it. But before he could even pick it up, Linda approached his table again. Her expression was different this time, soft, almost puzzled. "Sir," she said gently, "someone already paid for your meal." Mark blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" he asked. She nodded, placing the receipt in front of him. A man who was sitting a few tables over. "He left just a minute ago." Mark looked around, but the diner was nearly empty now. "Did he say anything?" Mark asked. Linda shook her head slightly. "Just this." She pointed to a small piece of paper taped to the receipt. Mark picked it up slowly. The handwriting was neat, careful, like someone had taken their time. It read, "I don't know your story, but I've been where you are. Keep going. You matter more than you think." Mark felt something shift inside him. He read the words again. And again. "I don't know your story." How could a stranger possibly know? But somehow, it felt like he did. Because in that moment, Mark realized something he hadn't admitted to himself before. He looked tired. Not just physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that shows in your posture, your silence, the way you stare a little too long at nothing. Maybe that stranger had seen it. Maybe he recognized something familiar. Mark swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He wasn't the kind of person who cried easily, but something about those simple words hit him deeper than he expected. It wasn't just the free meal. "Daddy," she said. "Did you have a good day?" Mark knelt down, hugging her a little tighter than usual. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." And for the first time in a long while, he meant it. Later that evening, he told his wife about what had happened. As he read the note out loud, his voice cracked slightly. She listened quietly, then reached for his hand. "See," she said gently. "There are still good people out there." Mark nodded. But it was more than that. For the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Not the loud, dramatic kind. Just a small, steady spark. The next morning, Mark woke up with a different mindset. Nothing in his situation had changed. He still didn't have a job, the bills were still there, but something inside him had shifted. He decided he wouldn't give up. That day, he applied to more jobs than he had in weeks. He followed up on old applications. He even reached out to people he hadn't spoken to in years. And slowly, things began to move. A week later, he got a call. A small construction company was looking for a supervisor. It wasn't a big job, and the pay wasn't perfect, but it was something. More importantly, it was a chance. Mark took it without hesitation. As the weeks passed, things started to stabilize. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. And through it all, Mark kept that note in his wallet. He would take it out sometimes, reading it when things felt overwhelming. "I don't know your story. Keep going. You matter." Those words became a quiet source of strength. A few months later, Mark found himself back at that same diner. This time, things felt different. He wasn't sitting there with the same weight on his shoulders. He ordered his meal, smiled a little more, even chatted briefly with Linda. When the check arrived, he looked at it for a moment. Then he reached for his wallet. But this time, he did something else too. Mark glanced around the diner. At a table near the window, he noticed a young man sitting alone, staring down at his plate in a way that felt familiar. That same quiet heaviness. That same distant look. Mark didn't know his story. But he didn't need to. He called Linda over and quietly said, "I'd like to take care of his bill too." She smiled knowingly. A few minutes later, Mark wrote something on a small piece of paper. He paused for a moment, thinking carefully. Then he wrote, "I don't know your story. But I've been where you are. Keep going. You matter more than you think." He placed it with the receipt and nodded to Linda. As he walked out of the diner, Mark felt something warm settle in his chest. Not pride. Not even happiness. Something deeper. Connection. Because kindness has a way of traveling. From one person to another. From one moment to the next. A stranger's simple act had changed his life, not by fixing everything, but by reminding him that he was seen, that he mattered. And now, he had passed that same message on. Maybe that young man would read the note and feel the same shift. Maybe it would help him keep going, just one more day. And maybe, someday, he would pass it on too. That's how kindness works. It doesn't end with one person. It grows. It spreads. It echoes. So the next time you see someone who looks like they're carrying a little too much, remember this story. You don't need to know their whole life. You don't need the perfect words. Sometimes, all it takes is a small gesture. A simple reminder. A moment of care. Because you never know. Your kindness might be the very thing that changes everything for someone else. And in a world that can feel heavy at times, that kind of ripple matters more than we can ever truly see.